Hey guys, and welcome back. Robert Warshak here, and we're going to be doing a video that you guys seem to really like every time a new set comes out and you guys really benefit from, and that's going to be our budget decks. Currently I have all of the classes. I built one budget deck for each class that I thought was the most effective, because there's no reason to give you 3 budget decks for the same class if one of those budget decks performs a lot better than the others. There's one particular class that you can build it a couple different ways, which we'll get to it when it comes, but besides that, going over all the classes, budget deck for each class, plus all of the decks are 2,500 dust or less. Most of them actually are below 2,000 dust. There's just a couple, like 1 or 2 of them that was like near that 2,500 mark. So, but most of them are below 2,000. So let's get into it. The first deck we're going to cover is going to be the Tempo Mage. Not a lot has actually changed with this deck with the new expansion. We lost a couple cards with the rotation, and the rotation that happened 2 expansions ago at the beginning of the year. But with that, we've actually gotten a couple new minions that have filled the spot of those cards that actually did get left out. So our Tempo Mage, or as we call it, Spell Mage, really not doing that bad. There's some core key changes. Was the Cosmic Anomaly, which is that 4 mana 4/3. Your spells have +2 spell power, and then Shooting Star are kind of the 2 cards that got implemented. I know this build looks a little bit different. I preferably like the spell heavy build. It has a couple minions that help the spells, and I know there is a version out that has more minions, and the minions buff the spells in the deck. But what I've seen is the spells that can just go face, and you have a couple minions. If they can put chip damage in, good, but if not, that's okay too, because you rely mainly on spells that are mainly on spells, and the minions help them, rather on you rely mainly on minions, and your spells help the minions live. So pretty solid build. The deck, you have to know when to try to go for board in the early game, and then when to give up that board and actually switch to, I need to start fireballing, frostbolting, arcane missiles, and try to get those to hit face, rather than clearing off the board so your mana worms and your sorcerer's apprentice and your Kirin mages and your, of course, cosmic anomalies can actually live and do damage. So there's that fine line. Very similar deck to, if anybody remembers Freeze Mage back in the day, you had to figure out when to turn off and on that switch of like, hey, I need to stop stalling and start hitting face, or I can keep stalling a couple turns more. So solid deck, hovering around 2,000 dust, does very, very well against any deck that, number 1, doesn't have a lot of healing, or number 2, doesn't really do anything in the early game. So if we look at currently decks like Rogue, especially like Miracle Rogue or the Quest Rogue, this deck performs very well against those. Some forms of the Hunter, because the Death Rattle Hunter does take a couple turns to ramp up. Towards 6 is when they normally, they're doing pretty well, but up until turn 4, they're not even, the Flanking Shot is like the first card they cast to deal with your board, and plus they have no healing in the deck at all besides maybe Rexar. So this deck very, very well against decks that don't have a lot of healing. It doesn't do well, however, against Druid, because Druid has an insane amount, and Druid has more armor than Warrior right now. So definitely Druid is not looking pretty. Warlock is pretty decent, depending on, if they get both of their spell stones, both of their Dark Packs and Gul'dan, those games are really rough. But most of the time, this deck can, like I said, do very well against classes with minimal to no healing, just for the fact that this has insane amounts of burn. From there, there's a couple cards that you could include to make this deck better. For each deck, I'll try to remember to what can make it better, but mainly if you're looking to upgrade this deck, literally just go to my deck testings or our Road to Legend videos and just type in the deck you're looking for, and I guarantee it, I've probably played it, unless it's Shudderwook Shaman, and I'm never playing that deck. So you're never going to find that on this channel. But, we have played Tempo Mage before, and the deck list is pretty good. But mainly you want the Alunith in this deck, the 6 mana 6 mana Mage legendary weapon that allows you to draw 3 cards at the end of this turn, or end of your turn, is very, very, very good. Very powerful. Besides that, I've seen some people tech in some Pyroblasts, but that's kind of totally up to you. And besides that, Alunith is really the only thing that's holding this deck back. I know the Loot Hoarders are kind of weird, but they actually do pretty well. You could try to put in AoqAAwA for a little bit more draw instead of just a 1. But besides that, very solid deck. And, turning it into its main rendition isn't actually that hard. The next deck we're going to talk about is the Budget Hunter, but more specifically the Budget Midrange Hunter. This is the same exact deck list that we hit Legend with 2 seasons ago when the new expansion hit. So as we know, Whispers of the Old Gods came out, where they were like, Rob, you know, I don't have all these cards. What deck can I play? So I built this deck and I played this deck to Legend. It contains no new cards, no legendaries, and the deck costs less than 1,500 dust. I tried to improve this deck with the new cards and I couldn't do it. I still got the same list. You know, you could try to put in another Vicious Fledgling if you want, and you know, pull back the tracking. You can try to add in some Fireflies, but when we played this deck, it just felt great. Spellbreakers are amazing. I wish I could, like I said, put in another Flappy Bird, which is the Vicious Fledgling, but it's hard to find the room. Tracking is just a really solid top deck if you're looking for damage in the late game, whether you're trying to go for your like Kill Command or Unleash the Hounds. I mean, the deck is incredibly solid, and I still get comments today on the old mid-range Hunter video like, hey Rob, this deck is crazy. I just won 10 games in a row with it. Or, you know, I went from rank 20 to 15 in 2 hours, or however much time. So there's still people playing this deck that I'm still getting comments for that it's performing very well. And I even took a look at it and I couldn't find any changes to it. What makes this deck really well, or what makes it a well-rounded deck, is the fact that you basically have a play to make every turn, especially turn 3, and especially if you have coins, so then you can actually coin 3 and then play something on 3, and then, you know, Houndmaster or Spellbreaker on 4, Spellstone on 5, and then Savannah Highmane on 6. But the opener that you want every game is Dire Maul into Crackling Razor Maul into like Vicious Fledgling, Animal Companion, or an Eaglehorn Bow. Put a Houndmaster on whatever, and then just kind of go to town from there. The other game plan is a little bit slower. You depend on your secrets, and then you're ramping to turn 5, so then you can Emerald Spellstone to make a whole bunch of 3/3 doggos. And then of course your Savannah Highmane is your like turn 6, I play this card, if you don't kill it I win. So really solid deck. This is probably one of the most powerful ones we have in the budget deck arsenal. Not to say that you shouldn't take a look at the other ones, which we do have some really juicy decks in here, but I mean, this one has proven to be really, really good. The next one we're going to take a look at is the Zoo list. Slightly more dust than the Hunter one, but still, in my opinion, a very, very strong deck. This particular archetype, the Zoo Warlock, thrives off very small, resilient minions, so minions that have a sizable amount of health or buff other minions for a cheap cost. So we look at like Flame Imp, it's a 1 mana 3/2, super statted for the mana cost, but you actually pay 3 life when you summon it, so there's kind of a drawback there. We look at Fungalmancer, it's a 5 mana 2/2, doesn't look that good, but it buffs either minion on the side of it +2/+2, and buffing cards like Vicious Fledgling, very, very, very good. We also have Soul Infusion, which is part of the new expansion that just hit, and it says buff the left side minion in your hand +2/+2. And if that lands on cards like Serenite Chain Gang, it's crazy value. Crazy value. Also, a card that I wanted to I wanted to include something in here. I believe I wanted to put in, I can't recall off the top of my head now. It was right there and then I lost it. But anyway, you also can use the Soul Infusion on the Doubling Imp, which is very, very good because it actually is going to make a 3 mana and you're going to get 2 4/4s, and Serenite gives you 2 4/5s. Oh, Prince. So for those of you who do have Prince Kel'Thuz's S, you can actually take out the Demon Fire and the Void Analyst, put in the Prince, and then add, if you would like to, probably a couple more 3-drops. If not, maybe a couple more 4-drops just to even out the mana curve. I couldn't think of the word Prince. He's a legendary, so that's obviously why he's not in the deck. But you can add Prince in this deck to make him a lot better, make the deck a lot better. And then also, for those of you who are wondering and have seen Zoo on Bladder, hey Rob, what do you think about the Voodoo Doctor, you know, the Fungal Enchanter and the Happy Ghoul combo with the Light Warden? It's solid, don't get me wrong, and when it works, you pop off and you do really well. But on the downside is you draw the cards out of combo, which seems to happen more times than not. If you don't have good RNG and you're not the best Zoo Warlock player in the world, you just don't draw the cards you need when you need them. So would you rather just have cards that are good on their own, and when you play them, they're good, and then if you happen to play them in synergy with other cards, they're even better? Or would you rather have cards that only really work in synergy with one another? So in my opinion, I like cards that are just good on their own, and then if you can combo them with other cards, that's great too. But I just want good cards, period. I don't want to draw cards that only work in certain situations, because if that situation does not arise, the card is therefore not as powerful. So with this particular deck, I find that every card basically has a purpose. The only card that I have to say is like very like, oh, could work out, could not, would be the Void Analyst, and I put her in there just because she's a really cool card, solid solid, decent, cheap minion, but feel free to, if you don't like that card or Demon Fire, to change them out with what is it called? These are the 2 mana 2/4. When you play them, you take 2 damage, or you even could put in the new like Bat card where it's like a 3 mana 2/4. If you've taken damage, just turn summon 2/1/1 bats. So those are decent replacements as well, and yeah, that's why I selected the deck the way it is. Very, very solid. Zoo is one of the most popular aggressive decks on ladder right now, and the reason being is it's very, very cheap to build, and it just does really well against slower decks. And we're seeing a lot of really greedy slow decks right now. A lot of greedy people out there trying to do some crazy shit that it should never work, but that's why there's aggro players to keep those super greedy players like me at bay. The next deck we're going to take a look at is probably one of my favorite out of all of the decks so far. Is going to be the Token Druid. The power of this boy, this is like kind of a mix in between the Hunter and the Zoo Warlock. So you don't really have like super cheap or resilient minions that you buff with other minions. You're actually using spells to buff your minions. So the key of this deck is to start off on the board, turn 1, have a play. Turn 2, summon 1 or 2 minions. Turn 3, summon 1 or 2 minions. Then on turn 4, you've got the ability to go like Soul of the Forest, which allows all of your minions currently on the board to have Death Rattle, summon 2/2 Trents. Or you could hold back, play this game a little bit slower, build up your hand, play cards like Whispering Woods that summons a 1/1 Wisp for every card you have in your hand, then follow that up with cards like Fungalmancer, Soul of the Forest, Savage Roar. So you could play this deck a little bit slower depending on your hand, or you could play this deck exceedingly aggro, put as many cards on the board as you can, make your opponent continuously have to answer, oh, if he has a Savage Roar, he has 5 minions out, he just wins, or 4 minions out. And this deck is able to summon minions like crazy. Everything in this deck normally summons something else, or buffs the board. Firefly summons another, basically you get another Firefly. Druid of the Storm, super high statted minion for the mana cost. Power of the Wild buffs the board. Witchwood Apple makes more minions. Landscape makes 2 minions. Whispering Woods makes many minions. Fungalmancer buffs minions. Spreading Plague makes many minions. Trending Tarn buffs minions or makes more minions. And then Mulch Muncher is kind of like your big solid removal tool. And most of the time you're playing a 8/8 rush minion for 1 to 2 mana, sometimes even free depending on how well you've drawn. How do we make this deck better? In my opinion, Branching Paths is a possible card you could add in here. Violet Teacher, I've seen some people tech into this deck, along with Ultimate Infestation is really, really good with this deck as well. Besides that, I'm looking at it, it's just really, like, the Whispering Woods, Soul the Forest, Savage Roar combo just destroys people. Also, Spreading Plague is another card that just almost wins games. You play against a Paladin, he has a bunch of 1/1s out, and, you know, you Spreading Plague and make 5 or 6 of those cards, then the following turn you just Savage Roar, Power of the Wild, you just win the game. So this deck just has so much burst, and it has the ability to summon so many minions so fast. The only drawback to this deck, though, I was trying to make that clean, that clean glasses swipe while also discussing, but then I realized it looks kind of silly, so I figured I'd make. Anyway, back to the thing. This deck's weakness is it doesn't really have a lot of draw, and that's because we didn't put Ultimate Infestation in this deck, and that is because it's an epic card, and I valued between Whispering Woods and or the Ultimate Infestation. I think Whispering Woods is a card that literally will make or break the game much before you play Ultimate Infestation. You know what I mean? Like, can this deck even live long enough where if you play UI and then when you play UI, can you win after that? Or could you just win the game through Whispering Woods before you played Ultimate Infestation? That's kind of where my mindset was and why I picked that card over UI, because this was one of those decks that costed 2,400 dust and I didn't want to go above that 2,500 mark. The next deck we're going to cover is probably one of the weakest out of the budget decks, and that's because Warrior has always been one of those decks that most of the cards in it are very, very expensive, and we've only really seen, at one time there was Pirate Warrior, very cheap, very good deck, very aggro, and it was tier 1 for a while. We haven't really seen a very cheap, aggressive Warrior deck since then that has been very effective on ladder. They've been doing some weird things with the Rush and Mech package, so that's why I've built us a nice little, like, Rush buff Warrior here. What it does well against is going to be other aggressive decks and other mid-range decks, and maybe depending on the control deck, like like, let's say like maybe a Druid because of Frothing Berserker and Festering Hulk. They didn't like, let's say they don't draw naturalized. It's hard for them to deal with mid-sized huge minions. But besides that, this deck is going to unfortunately get outvalued by any sort of control deck, like a Warlock or a Priest will eat this deck alive. But if you're playing against, you know, others, if you're playing against a lot of Zoo, a lot of Hunter, a lot of Rogue, this deck will definitely be able to keep up with those guys because it has nice resilient minions, it has weapons to be able to clear them off, it has buffs for those minions to make favorable trades, and it has a good amount of draw with cards like Battle Rage, and it has decent removal with also Execute along with buffing your minions. So as bad as this deck looks and as bad as it is against control, it's very, very, in my opinion, very effective against other aggro decks / mid-range decks, just because it has a ton of burst with Rampage, stuff like that, and the Kirin Elite, and the Frothing Berserker with the Blood Razor. And it also has a sizable amount of defensive stuff, because if you're playing against an aggro class, you can hold the board and armor up. It's a solid deck against certain matchups. Like I said, it's very bad against some, but it's pretty solid against others. I would give it a shot. It's fairly cheap. Plus, no one's going to know what you're playing. Like, no one is going to be playing this deck. So when you play Warrior, they're automatically going to think like Control Warrior, Odd Warrior, Quest Warrior, and then you're not playing any of those because they're really expensive, and that's why I didn't include them. And then you start playing like Rush cards, and like, oh, he's Rush Warrior. Oh, snap, he plays Fester Hulk. Oh my God, he plays Commander and Elite, and he plays all this other stuff. They're like, holy moly, what is this deck? And then they end up outplaying themselves because they don't know what you're playing. That's actually one of the things that helps a lot of players more than not, is when you play on ladder and you're playing like, let's say, a really cool deck that you've homebrewed, and your opponent's playing some, you know, tier 1, tier 2 deck that's everybody's playing, and that person has never seen your deck before. They don't know how to play against it because they can't use their imagination to think beyond what's exactly a net deck. And then you're actually, you can take a hold of the situation and play around stuff and have them play into stuff or not into stuff, because they have no idea what's in your deck and they can't put 2 and 2 together to think like, oh, if he's playing this deck, he might be running this. I should probably play around it. No, if it's not a net deck to some of these people, they have no idea. They can't comprehend. They do not understand. It does not compute. .exe has stopped working. So heading over to the Combo Priest, if you'd like a challenge, really, in my opinion, pretty hard deck to run. Has a lot of favorable matchups. A very strong deck, but very, very hard deck for newer players to grasp, understand, and then build the combo, and then effectively put it into a game against another player who's trying not to let that combo to happen and then win with it. So essentially, the most simplistic way to put this deck is to make a minion, give that minion as much health, and buff that health as high as possible. So let's say, you know, we have a Injured Blade Master at 7 HP after you've healed it to full. From there, we can go ahead and like Power Ward Shield. It goes to 9. From there, we use Divine Spirit. And we turn it into 18. So now it has 18 health. And then we can either Divine Spirit again, or we could go ahead and Interfire and make it an 18/18 minion and attack your opponent in the face. That's why we have in this deck a lot of minions, or I should say 3 specifically, that have a sizable amount of health. Those being the Underpowered Steambot, which has 9 HP, which is craziness. Arc Creeper, which is 5 HP, solid. And then Injured Blade Master, which has 7 HP. From there, the Injured Blade Master is in the deck for Rob. I haven't seen this card in forever. You can go Northshire, Cleric, Coin, Injured Blade Master, Circle of Healing, and the fact that it's damaged actually helps you because it allows you to draw, and it's pretty good with the Northshire, Cleric, Circle of Healing combo, and playing a 3 mana 4/7 is very, very solid. Let's say if you're playing like against an aggro deck, you don't really need to combo them down right away. You just want to get the board so they don't swarm you, because there's really no AoE in this deck. Yeah, so it's a very draw heavy deck. Cycles really very well. Wild Pyromancer's really your only way besides Spirit Lash to deal with aggro. Against control, you really don't need to worry about them doing damage to you that quickly, because it's a control deck and they're not built for that. And your best matchups are slower decks. The slower the deck you're playing against, the better odds you have of being able to make minions 40 plus attack and just killing them in one turn. Because if you have a Steambot that lives in a turn and you've got 2 Divine Spirits and an Interfire in your hand, and your Steambot has 9 HP and they don't have a taunt, you just win. So cards that you could put in this deck to make it a little bit more effective against maybe like decks with taunt would be take out like a Witchwood Piper and add in the 0 mana Silence, just so you have something for 0 mana that can silence. You also could put in the Mass Dispel. So very, like I said, very difficult deck to play, but definitely a deck that'll do well on ladder if you stay proficient with it, keep it going, and get some good matchups. Obviously, if you're playing Zoo Warlock all day, this deck is going to get run over. But again, not every deck is good all of the time against everything. If there's a deck that's good against everything, it's probably a tier 1 deck that is super meta. Shutterwook. Which we haven't actually seen that deck a lot, but the deck just was good against everything. It beat control, beat aggro, beat mid-range. And that's what we're seeing now with Zoo Warlock. Zoo Warlock beats other aggro decks, it beats mid-range decks, it beats control decks. Same thing goes for Druid. Druid, Togwaggle Druid, and Malagos Druid. Good against aggro decks, good against mid-range decks, good against control decks. So the decks that are normally good against just about everything are the tier 1 decks, or not the budget versions of those decks. So just keep in mind, budget version decks definitely have weaknesses, and that's why they're budget versions, but they still have all the core pieces they need to do well in the matchup that normally they would do well in. The next deck we're going to look at is super cool. I enjoyed myself while building this one a lot, because I was like, I have to fit in some sort of control deck in these budget decks. I was like, all right, I can't do it with Warrior, because Warrior, it's just too expensive to do it. You'd need either Baku or the Quest. The deck's going to be 4,000, 5,000 dust by the time I'm done with it, and it's going to be like a really bad control deck. So I was like, all right, let's try Pogo Rogue, because I'm like, Pogo, the card's cheap as shit. We built a control combo deck, less than 2,000 dust, that's actually pretty solid. So as we know, Pogo Rogue is very, very weak to aggro deck. So I tried to put in as many resources in this deck to be able to withstand against an aggro or a more mid-range based deck. So that's why we have 2 Fan of Knives, Clan Thug, SI Agent, the Vile Spine Slayer, and Saps. Besides that, we have all the tools we need to beat other control decks, because all you truly need is to play Pogo Hopper and then return him back to your hand. So that's why we're playing Shadow Steps, Lab Recruiter, and Youthful Brewmaster. Those are your cards that you're going to be using on the Pogo Hopper to make more Pogo Hoppers. And eventually your opponent will not be able to deal with them, because if you think about it, if you go Pogo, Lab Recruiter, Pogo, and then bounce back your Lab Recruiter, and then Lab Recruiter back a Pogo, you're actually, Lab Recruiter is generating 3 Pogos, but if you end up like let's say Useful Brewmastering Pogo, then you're only really getting 1 out of the deal. So if you're playing a super late game, like against a control, like just straight up control fatigue warrior, you're going to want to make more Lab Recruiters than Pogos. If you're playing against maybe more mid-range deck, you can probably get away with bouncing Pogo more, because the game isn't going to go as long, and you'd rather have the minion stats on the board immediately rather than the potential of having to wait to draw those hoppers out of your deck. The three hoppers you put in your deck through the Lab Recruiter. So just think about it like that. Depending on your matchup, you play more expedited versus a little bit slower. But this is a super cool deck. Has a lot of tools to deal with the early game, sizable ways to deal with the late game. I'm sorry you heard the woohoo. I forgot to close out the alert box. So anybody who's following us or subs on Twitch is gonna pop up, so hopefully not too many people do that while we're making the video, which we've only heard 1 follow so far, so it's not too bad, but sorry about the woohoo. So super fun deck, like this deck a lot. If you want a nice juicy cheap control deck that is fun, Pogo Hopper is your bunny. All right, moving to the token / bloodlust Shaman. This is a deck we actually played at the beginning of when the new expansion hit. Between Thunderhead and Volcanic Burst and Bloodlust, the value is unreal. You can make favorable trades all day. You make a ton of 1/1s. Super interesting deck. There's a lot of lines of play that can be made. Do I make minions now, Bloodlust later? Do I Bloodlust now? Do I develop the board? Do I hero power? Do I make more small minions now? Hold back a little bit for later? When do I go for the overload cards? So there's a lot of good stuff with this deck. A lot of decently difficult turns to navigate through as it being an aggro deck, but still having some skillful tendencies in there. Flame Tongue Totem is your best friend. Primal Fin Totem is your best. Like, if you can start the game going coin Primal Fin into Flame Tongue Totem, ooh, hot diggity dog, you're gonna be okay. Or you have coin, and you can go like coin Unbound Elemental into like Feral Spirits, super powerful play as well. So some cards that'll make this deck better over time. Hagatha is one of the ones that make it exceedingly, like, you can outvalue a control deck with Hagatha in this deck. Stormbringer, the new 3-mana legendary Shaman minion that copies the last spell you played. So on turn 8, you can go like the Stormbringer, or Storm Surge into Bloodlust and do 2 Bloodlust. We've done that multiple times in our games that we played this on ladder. Do upwards of 30 plus damage in a single turn with like 3 minions on the board, 4 minions on the board. Stormbringer is the new Shaman legendary spell that transforms all minions on your board into random legendary minions. As we know, there's a lot of small minions in this deck. Transforming them into random legendaries, very, very good as well. Hagatha, like I mentioned, you also can play Kalamos in this deck because there's a sizable amount of elementals. There's a lot of different directions you can take with this deck. If you're interested in seeing the final rendition of this deck and what it looks like, I recommend checking out our Bloodlust / Token Shaman, which will be under deck testings on the channel. Super fun deck. I enjoyed a lot. It's one of the only more aggressive decks that I've been playing a sizable amount that I can enjoy, play a lot of, and not get just burnt out, because you're not playing the same game over and over and over again and playing the same exact cards. There's a lot of different intricacies to this deck because of the overload mechanic and the fact that there's just elementals you got to worry about when to play them, stuff that like Hagatha is a pretty fun card, even though very high RNG based. It's no offense. At first I didn't like her, but now that I've been playing with her a little bit with this deck, it's just like, oh, what spell is she going to give me now that I'm going to have to be creative and figure out how to implement that into my next play? So there's that. The final deck we're going to go over, not a bad deck, just not that exciting in comparison to like Pogo Rogue and Bloodlust Shaman. I mean, those decks are just great. This one's your straightforward. It's a mid-range Mech Paladin. You know, not like if you're a new player, not sure what to build, you just want a nice, easy sail. You know, a lot of the plays are kind of right in your face. You know, the mid-range hunter's there. The mid-range mech deck is here. There's no crazy combo plays that you're going to be putting together with this deck to like obliterate your opponent in like a turn. You know what I mean? Like the craziest this deck will get is like an equality consecration, which clears the board on your opponent's side, or maybe like a mechano egg into like a war gear, so you make your egg into like, you know, a 5/13 or something like that. Those are the craziest plays that you're going to be making with this deck. But it's definitely decks like this are good for newer players and budget-based players because they do what they do it well. Play a minion every turn, mech with or mechanize or magnetic ties with other mechs to make them really big, make them really resilient, hit your opponent in the face, eventually they'll die. And or, you know, you look at your hand and you basically just have mainly minions, and it's all right, what's the strongest minion I can play this turn? All right, that's the minion I play. All right, what's the, like, sometimes maybe playing not the strongest minion in your turn to save it for later is better, but most of the time, like this kind of deck, you know, turn 1, you play your Righteous Protector or your Glowtron. Turn 2, do you Dark Conviction? Do you play Hydrologist? Do you coin out a 3-drop? No, do you buff it with Blessings of Might? Do you play Christology? Do you know, turn 3, Bronze Gatekeeper or Stonehill Defender? Turn 4, do you buff a minion, play a weapon, or play another minion? Like, the stuff, like, there's not multiple different ways to play out a single card. It's the card does this. This is what the card does. Do you want to use it or not? So, solid deck. Not one of my favorites out of all these, but if you're looking, like I said, for a pretty simple, straightforward deck to get you through it, not looking for some crazy combo pogo or crazy combo priest deck, you know, just solid, run-of-the-mill, nice mid-range Mech Paladin. This is your good stuff. It'll perform very well against other aggro decks, very well against other mid-range decks. It'll get, unfortunately, this deck is very weak to control decks. This deck will get absolutely slaughtered by other control decks because you don't have any late game value. This deck only goes up to the Spike Ridge Steed. If you want to make this better, you put in the new legendary Paladin spell that resurrects 3 of your mechs that have died this game, and they actually keep their magnetic abilities. So if you upgraded them at all, they'll come back. Also, Zil, the new legendary mech, the 5-mana 3/2 Divine Shield, Taunt, Rush, Magnetic, he also has Lifesteal, is very good in this deck as well. So there's some upgrades that you can throw in and make this deck a bit better. So with that, if you've enjoyed the video and you like what you've seen, be sure to let me know in the comment section below, and or if you have any recommendations or may have things that I may have left out, definitely let me know, as this was one of our longer videos. There's a lot of information to cover. Try to cover as much of it and as fast as You know what I'm saying. As much of it and as fast time as possible without leaving too many things out. Sometimes I forget, so if I did and there's something I missed, let me know in the comment section below. Help those other guys out in the comments that are looking for a little bit more information to kind of up their game, or if they have questions about any of these decks. So with that, thank you for watching. I will catch you in the next episode, of course, or on Twitch. As always, I'm Robert Warshak, and happy whatever the hell day it is.